Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric here with Iraq Veteran 8888. All right, today we're going to be discussing priming. All right, this is going to be fun. Now, this is going to be sort of a primers 101. We're not going to go completely in the weeds here, but we are going to go over some really cool information. Some of you are probably getting into reloading for the first time, and you probably have a lot of questions about the components of a cartridge, what makes up a cartridge, how primers work, what they are. This video hopefully will shed some light for some of you who are getting into this type of a hobby. It's a really cool undertaking. I think you'll really enjoy it. Before we get started, I would like to thank our friends at Sonoran Desert Institute for supporting today's video. If you're looking for some formal education in the world of gunsmithing, reloading, drones, gun business, all those sorts of things, check them out. They got some awesome curriculum, great instructors, wonderful distance learning opportunities. Check them out, SDI, Sonoran Desert Institute, and tell them that Eric sent you. All right, so when we talk about primers, probably one of the most important inventions for small arms to ever occur is the metallic primer and the metallic cartridge. Before we had access to metallic primers, now I have this camera zoomed in way close right here, and I've got my little remote on the table to show you. Just the star of the show today is very tiny, y'all. Here's a pack of primers. Bear with me here, but this is a sleeve of primers. So this is what the star of the show is. This is what we're talking about, primers. These little guys right here. Little bitty metallic cups. I'll show a close-up of that, all right? But before we had primers, things were kind of crude, okay? We had everything from burning match cord, some of the first small arms, or let's just say shoulder-fired, man-portable small arms were nothing more than tubes with powder and a projectile stuffed down them and a burning match cord that would be placed on a vent hole to touch off the charge and propel the projectile out of the barrel. So very crude types of technologies gave way to flintlocks. Okay, we would have a piece of flint held, basically on a hammer, and it would fall down and strike a frizzen and throw sparks into a tray that would set off the priming charge and then set off the main charge. So very cumbersome, difficult to use, prone to moisture. Obviously, flintlocks are a fast ignition system, but for a long-term military type of solution, definitely not a long-term viable solution. That gave way to percussion caps. All right, so when we look at this primer here that's on the table now, it is very tiny, of course. I'm going to show you a close-up. We have a percussion cap. This is a 4-wing percussion cap. Hopefully you can see that here in the shot. I will show you again a close-up. Percussion caps were a much better solution to the flintlock. It was definitely a faster way of priming the firearm to make it go off and to set off your powder charge. However, it did have some limitations. Carrying around loose loose musket caps was kind of a problematic thing. They could get moisture. They still cumbersome to load. You still limited to one shot. So black powder firearms gave way to smokeless, and when smokeless powder was invented in the early, I'd say the late 1800s, around 1891 or so, in that ballpark, when smokeless powder came around and the metallic cartridge came around, it really changed things a heck of a lot. Once we had a metallic cartridge, now we could have a firearm that could handle a lot more pressure, could shoot bullets at higher velocities, and the metallic primer, which is what we're discussing today, was a very important outgrowth of technology in that time. Now, let's go back to primers, because that's what we're talking. Before we talk about primers, though, let's talk about the components of a cartridge. All right, now, I purposely chose these very large components so that I could show you, hopefully you can see a little bit better the size. Now, this is a 577-450 Martini Henry service cartridge. This is the brass that's been formed off of a 24 gauge Magtech shot shell hole. Okay, this is 100 grains of powder. So you have your brass, which contains the powder. This is the powder in a vial, just to show you the powder charge. You have a projectile, which obviously you're not going to have much of a cartridge without a projectile. So you've got your projectile that gets seated. Now this is a paper patch projectile. We're going to go over that sort of stuff in a later video. This is a paper patched 468 diameter projectile. Actually, that might be a 454 in order to be paper patched out to 468. I have to check the measurement, but I digress. You got a paper patch projectile, a piece of brass, a powder charge, and the star of our show today, a primer, this little bitty guy right here. So let's set these components aside. Now that you know what makes up a cartridge, when you fire your firearm, a firing pin strikes this cup, okay? Now, there are two basic types of primers, and I actually do have, believe it or not, Berdan rifle primers here to show you. You have a Berdan primer, and you have a Boxer primer. Now, again, you're probably not going to see these very well in this wide shot, but I will go in even closer for a close-up look with the camera. This is a tiny little, thing to have to photograph here. But you have a Berdan primer and a Boxer primer. And here's the weird thing about it. Berdan primers, the cup it has the priming mixture in it and the cup of the primer, and then the anvil, okay, that the charge is set off against when the priming mixture is impacted by the firing pin. It actually strikes an anvil that is built into the brass casing or steel casing. Like a lot of your Russian surplus, like your 7.62 by 54 rimmed and things, those use a steel case with the anvil built into the case. And they have two opposed little vent holes for the charge to go through and set off or the powder inside the cartridge. A Boxer primer, this is, interestingly enough, a European invention. Colonel Berdan invented the Berdan primer, and then the Russians wound up using the Berdans, and then I think it was a British guy or a European that invented the Boxer primer, and oddly enough, now the it's kind of mixed. The Americans, Western allies and people like that wound up using the Boxer primer, and oddly enough, the Russians and those sorts of folks wound up using the Berdan primer. The Boxer primer has the anvil, chemical mixture, and the cup of the primer all built into one unit. When you look at the base of a cartridge that's been deprimed of a Boxer primer, it's just a big open hole and one single hole in the center. All right, that's a Boxer primer. That's because the primer, everything is built into the primer itself, whereby with the Berdan primer, the cup of the primer and the chemical mixture is the only thing that's there, and it can't be set off without the anvil that is placed inside of the Berdan prime case. You could not put a Berdan primer in a Boxer case and expect it to work. For one, I think the dimensions are slightly different, but two, there's nothing there for it to strike up against. Now, how does this work, okay? Well, do you guys remember back in the day, like all your random cap guns and things like that, and things? So there are a variety of volatile chemicals that are put together in a very precise mixture to obtain, basically, once that friction comes from the firing pin, all it takes is that little strike against the anvil, and it sets off the charge. It's very reliable. It's very weatherproof. Many times when a primer is put into a case, it's sealed. They'll put a sealant, and that helps seal it from moisture and things like that. So that makes that cartridge much more bomb-proof. But a variety of chemicals are put into these cartridges to make them work. Now, I believe it was either chlorine, potassium chlorate that was in the original Berdan cartridges, if I'm not mistaken. Hopefully I got that right. So that's why a lot of Berdan rifle cartridges are highly corrosive, because of the priming mixture they use. Now, the nice thing about using that type of priming mixture was that it was very shelf stable and good for long-term military storage. So that's why a lot of your Russian surplus and stuff that uses the other type of corrosive primer compound, that ammo holds up so great to long-term storage. In fact, there's even been situations where people have found Russian dugouts from World War II, okay, you know where this is going, and they've dug up and excavated World War II battle sites and found Russian ammo in trenches from World War II that, despite the can being a little bit nasty on the outside, when they would open some of these ammo cans and get towards the middle of the can where maybe some of the moisture had not quite gotten to the ammo itself, you would actually still find perfectly functional 7.62 by 54 rimmed, 7.62 by 25 Tokarev ammunition, completely good to go, completely corrosion free, and likely probably will fire, even though it's been sitting, in a buried trench for, however many years. I digress. The point is that the two basic primer types are Berdan and Boxer. For the purposes of the reloader here in the US, you're pretty much going to focus on Boxer priming. So pretty much just forget about Berdan. I kind of want to just tell you about it because, it's important to know. Like if you think that you're going to take a, steel case 54R that you shot in your Mosin out of a surplus ammo can, and you're going to deprime it and reload it, well, it's not going to, you're going to break your decapping pin in your die when you try to pop that primer out because there's no central hole. The holes are offset to either side. So you're going to break your decapping pin instantly when you try to decap or otherwise resize a Berdan rifle case. There are ways to reload Berdan ammo. Just take it from me that the juice is not worth the squeeze. At one point I got into reloading Berdan ammunition, and the reason that I did was because I had a Swiss K31 that used a really nice clean GP11 service ammo with, man, really nice annealed brass case. And it's like, man, I felt so bad to throw away those GP11s when they were such great ammo, and I know the brass could be reloaded a few times. So I did at one point get into doing a little bit more work with the GP11 and using Berdan primers. It can be done. Is the juice worth the squeeze? For the purposes of this video, we're probably just going to say no. All right, again, for a size comparison, all right, so this is a 50 BMG cartridge. I'm going to try to show the back here. Hopefully we can see this well. This is, you can see here that you've got your primer, okay? And it's probably hard to see. This is an M33 ball round, but on the back there's a slight indentation along the outside of this Boxer primer hole that is in the back of this 50 BMG case. That is a swage that they put in there, a slight swage. And what that does is that keeps the primer from working its way out in recoil forces, and also keeps the primer just, securely locked in the case. So you got to think military ammo is harshly handled, thrown around in bad weather conditions. So if you reload, let's say a military piece of brass like a 50 BMG or 5.56 or a 7.62 by 51 NATO, you're going to likely have a primer pocket that has been crimped or swaged. This is a swage. It's very hard to see, but it's there. Okay. Now here's a fired case. Okay. You can see that primer sets back a little bit. That primer flattened out a little, but see you've got the primer cup and then the centralized part that's been hit by the firing pin. Just that tiny little hit right there set off that giant 50 BMG. This was fired in a Barrett M107A1. All right, and again, here's just for comparison, a couple of 44 Magnums. You can see it's obviously quite easy to tell when a cartridge has been fired. You can see the indentation. I think we all know what fired brass looks like. We see it all the time. Sometimes we pick it up and keep it, but everyone knows what a fired case looks like as opposed to a live round. All right, so pretty simple overall. Let's talk about a couple of different types of Boxer primers. All right, so you're going to see as you go through your reloading manual, all right, you're going to see that the manual is going to call for a certain type of primer. So let's say if we're loading 45 ACP, it's going to call for a large a large pistol primer. So when you buy your primers, like right here, now this is just for nostalgia's sake, an old school set of Wolf primers. Now, these primers I bought back when these things were like $1.60 a sleeve. Now that's been a minute, boys and girls. This is 100 primers for like $1.60. And you better believe I stocked up on these things. I bought a bunch of them. But here we have some Wolf. So we can see here that Wolf not only makes ammo, or made ammo, well, they still do. I guess we have the Russian sanctions to deal with. But Wolf not only makes ammo, but they make primers. All right? Think about your favorite brands like PMC, right? You shoot a lot of PMC ammo. Well, look, PMC has these large rifle Berdan primers. Now, these are hard to get, boys and girls. Not common. But you can see that each sleeve of primers is going to tell you exactly what it's meant to do. Here we've got CCI bench rest primers. These are BR2s. All right, so what's a bench rest primer? A bench rest primer, what that is a primer that is much more consistent. Usually they're individually weighed and sorted a little bit better. It's a much stricter sorting process. They are marked on the cup with a little star or a symbol usually, or a B or something like that, to let you know that it's a bench rest primer or a BR on it. A bench rest primer has a much more sensitive cup. You got to think, a fancy match rifle that has a really light trigger might also have a lightened spring in it. So a bench rest primer has a slightly softer cup so that a lighter firing pin strike can set the cartridge off. So these are more sensitive, okay? So look at where we're going. Now we have something like a CCI number 41 or 34 military primer. A military primer will have a thicker cup. Well, why would the primer cup need to be thicker with a military type of cartridge? Well, if the gun is operating semi-automatically as opposed to a bolt action, all of that jostling back and forth and things like that could, pose an issue. And you want to have a tough primer cup that requires a full power firing pin hit to set the cartridge off. Most military rifles have heavier triggers, heavier hammer springs, so on and so forth. You see where this is going? So there are certain primers set up for certain situations. Here we have some CCI. These are 250 large rifle Magnum, all right? Well, why would you need a Magnum? You need a Magnum because a Magnum cartridge, it has a lot of powder in it, requires a much hotter and more compound, a hotter compound to make sure you really set that charge off. Could a Magnum rifle, like a 300 Winchester Magnum, 7mm Magnum, could it work with a large rifle primer that's a standard primer? It could in a pinch. Could you get some soft starts, some hang fires, potentially some rounds fail to go off? Yes, you can. So that's why they have a Magnum primer for a Magnum cartridge. So whatever the manual calls for, that's what you're going to buy. All right, if you're loading 9mm, you're going to just use small pistol primers. You can, CCI, Federal. You can see, of course, these are CCI. So any of your famous and well-loved ammunition brands, okay, they also make primers. Federal, CCI, Winchester, Remington, PMC, Wolf, you name it. Chances are, if they're a major firearms manufacturer, or ammo manufacturer, chances are they sell components as well. So that includes your primers, okay? So whatever the manual calls for, that's the primer that you're going to get. Now, in terms of priming tools, there are a variety of different ways that you can prime your case once you get ready to get into the reloading scenario. Now, I prefer the RCBS APS primer strip loading tool. It is a little bit of an older tool, but they have two different varieties. They have a handheld variety that uses like a little thing you squeeze, and you just basically put each cartridge in there, squeeze it, and it primes it. And they also have a press-mounted APS primer strip tool, and it is so cool. You take the primers and you shake them out into this little tray, and the tool loads them onto these strips, and then the strips go through sort of like in a matrix each way. It indexes and passes through, and you just go through and you prime each piece of brass. Very fast, very efficient, and it doesn't really require any special tools other than just having your APS primer strip loader, as well as whatever shell holder you need to load the cartridge with. So the nice thing about the APS strip system from RCBS is that as long as you have a shell holder for whatever cartridge you're trying to load, you can load it. I mean, this 577-450 uses a very odd type of shell holder, right? You may not have a specialized priming shell holder sitting around for this, but as long as I have a shell holder that fits my press, I can use that priming tool to prime my cartridges, okay? Now, I'm not going to get too much into equipment on this. I really wanted this to be just about primers in general, so that some of you who are getting into reloading ammunition can really be pointed in the right direction on, what these primers do. Yes, there are differences, some of the things to look out for. I mean, Berdan priming being something that, you're going to ruin your reloading die if you try to squeeze a Berdan cartridge up into a boxer die. That's obvious. So there might have been some things in this video I went over that probably, I hope, helped some of you, very much so. But primers are a crucial part of a smokeless cartridge. And also, as I showed you those components earlier for the Martini Henry, this is a black powder cartridge that uses a modern primer, okay, a modern type of rifle primer that we put into this 24 gauge MagTech shot shell hull. So primers have their place both in black powder cartridge shooting today and, of course, smokeless. But just know that there are a variety of different primers, and whatever you decide to do with your priming needs, make sure that you consult your manual. There are a ton of different manuals from a bunch of different manufacturers. The one that I recommend is Richard Lee's Modern Reloading. I think it's in its 4th or 5th volume now. That's certainly the one that you want to check out. It's got data. It's got a great forward and a good primer in there on reloading, you know, the process, bullet casting, priming. Everything you need to know to go from start to finish to make a cartridge is covered in Richard Lee's Modern Reloading. That's definitely a volume that I think everybody needs to have because it's like a $20 book, totally worth having. Every reloader needs the Richard Lee volume in their arsenal. So I would say start out with that one and then just go through and read it and then read it again. And then whenever you're checking your data, check it and then double check it. Whatever primer it calls for, check that primer and then double check it. Make sure you've got the right primer. Because as you can see, as you get down the rabbit hole of loading up a bunch of different ammo, the options can begin to get a little bit dazzling, okay? You can certainly get into a variety of different primers, and if you're not careful, you can grab the wrong primer. Is it going to have, you know, disastrous implications? Probably not, but at the same time, you need to treat it as the process it deserves to be treated in, and that is meticulously and with respect and caution, and make sure you're using all your PPE and being safe and taking your time, and don't get distracted. That's one, you know, thing that I would mention about reloading ammunition. Don't get distracted. Make sure that you take your time, remove all the distractions, and focus on the task at hand, and you'll make perfectly safe and usable ammo that's probably better than what you can buy in the factory, okay? Definitely. I know people say that all the time, but it's true because a hand load can be tailored to your exact needs. So that's something that is rarely offered in a factory load. Yeah, you're going to get some great ammo from the factory, but are you going to get exactly what you want with the exact primer and powder and bullet you want and the brand of brass you want, the combination of components that's going to work perfectly for you? You're only going to get that by making it yourself. So I hope this video pointed some of you in the right direction. This has been a primer on priming. Let me know, I'm sorry, how you liked today's video. I wanted to do some reloading related content. I do have a lot more stuff on the way. We are going to get back into making some ammo. I'm probably going to do a video on making 50 BMG. I think a lot of people have been asking me about loading 50. So that's something I want to get into doing soon. And I actually do have a pending project on the bench right now to load up some 577 450 and also some 577 Snyder ammo. So as I finish those projects up, I might bring y'all along and document some of the process. But I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know what you thought about this type of format. Did you learn something? Is there something I didn't cover that I should have? Let me know. Is there a way that I can make the video better? Is there something you prefer that I showed? Let me know. Definitely have yourselves a great day. Thanks so much for tuning in. Many more videos on the way. We'll see you soon.